this for some time. I was thinking back to the first gospel sermons, the first gospel meetings really, that I heard while here as a member of the congregation. In fact, before one of them was right after I entered into the school of preaching, and two before, Brother Foy Wallace Jr. and then Brother George E. Darling Sr., and then followed that up with Roy D. And that's quite a combination. And it's very humbling to stand before you and to address you, knowing of these men who have gone before. Men such as Gus Nichols, G.K. Wallace, but Winfred Clark and others that we have all loved and heard over the years and appreciated their strong stand for the truth, love for souls. I was reminded the other day as I was thinking about the meeting with Brother Darling. We had a huge dinner on the ground, had everybody out there, and I remember Brother George making some remark as he was wont to make. He said, you know, folks, the more I eat, the longer I preach. And some dear sister tried to take his plate away from him. I believe her initials were Doc Rand. I may be mistaken. But it is indeed a pleasure. We love this congregation, the elders, the deacons, every member, the sound gospel preacher and his family, Brother Michael Hatcher. We've grown to love Michael and Tara and have been favorably impressed from the day that he became the preacher for this congregation, and have appreciated his stand and still do. We are frequently involved in discussions online back and forth from different Bible subjects and things of this nature. And preachers have a culture almost all of their own in that respect. And Michael is a man that you can contact and you know you're going to get some sound advice. We appreciate him so very much. Please turn in your Bibles now to Zechariah chapter 4. Our study, as was announced or is announced in the flyer, is on despise not the day of small things. Despise ye not the day of small things. And the passage we're dealing with in Zechariah chapter 4, verses 9 and 10. Zechariah 4, verses 9 and 10. The hands of Zerubbabel have laid the foundation of this house. His hand shall also finish it, and thou shalt know that the Lord of hosts hath sent me unto you. For who hath despised the day of small things? For they shall rejoice and shall see the plummet in the hand of Zerubbabel with those seven. They are the eyes of the Lord who run, or which run to and fro through the whole earth. In 586 BC, the great temple of Jerusalem was destroyed by Nebuzaradan, the captain of the host of the Babylonian army. He'd been sent to besiege the city of Jerusalem for some time before then, and had carried out the orders of the great king Nebuchadnezzar II, called Nebuchadnezzar the Great, and in so doing destroyed the city of Jerusalem, burned the temple, pulled it to the ground, and carried captive the bulk of the population of the southern kingdom, including the inhabitants of Jerusalem that survived the siege. With that ended the independent southern kingdom. And the great prophecies that had been made by Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel came to pass concerning the punishment of the southern kingdom for its idolatry and its immorality. Some 50 years later, around 536 BC, Cyrus the Great, or Cyrus II, king of Persia, issued his edict to rebuild the temple. We have the record of that in 2 Chronicles chapter 36, also Ezra chapter 1. And we even have a version of it that has been found in the city of Ecbatana in what is called the Cyrus Cylinder, that confirms the important aspects of this record in the Bible. And Cyrus issued his edict and permitting the Jews that would, who were willing, to go back and rebuild the temple, to restore it to its former glory. And a considerable number went up. They began work on the temple in that year. But opposition arose from a group of people known as the Samaritans. These people were not at that point in time the same people that we know of as the Samaritans in the time of Jesus. The Samaritans at the time of Jesus were actually the result of intermarriage between the Jews, the Hebrews, and the people that are called the Samaritans at this point in history around 536 BC. During the reign of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, the Assyrians had adopted a policy. In fact, even before him, Ashurbanipal had carried this out with other, or not Ashurbanipal, but Sinshar-Ashkan and Tiglath-Pileser had carried out the idea of transporting people out and moving other people into their place. This had also taken place under Shalmaneser III and IV, and under Sargon the Great. And so, of course, in 722 BC, they had carried the northern tribes captive beyond the river Euphrates, put them in the region of Midian, and left the land open pretty much. But during Esarhaddon, his reign, around 685 BC, the Assyrians decided they would put a new people into the area that had belonged to the northern tribes. And so they brought in people from Midian, Babylonia, and various other provinces, including Elamites and even people from the steppes of Russia, people known as the Scyths or Scythes. And they were settled in this area. Well, these were Gentiles, and they brought their false gods and all of their other practices with them, and they continued to worship after their pagan fashion. But when the Jews were brought back in 536 BC, they saw these Jews as a threat to their own way of doing things. And especially because they had their own plans as to what to do about Jerusalem and the southern kingdom, the southern region. They had expanded much of their power base into that area. And they were not happy with Cyrus's decision. But Cyrus was a very strong king, a very powerful king. And his successor, Cambyses, was of the same nature. But while Cambyses was down in Egypt, carrying out his campaign and really trying to expand the borders of the Persian Empire as far south as Ethiopia, there arose a man by the name of Pseudo-Smerdis. He called himself Smerdis, but he was a phony. He is called in the Bible Ahasuerus. In the book of Ezra, don't confuse him with the Ahasuerus of Esther. They're two different men. And this Ahasuerus began to plot and plan to overthrow Cambyses. And he claimed to be Smerdis, that is Cambyses' elder brother. The only thing is, Cambyses knew that Smerdis was dead because Cambyses murdered him in order to get the throne. And when he heard that Smerdis was now claiming to be the king, he gathered up his forces and headed back to Persia. But Cambyses died en route. Smerdis was able to consolidate his power and remain king for a few years. And because of his suspicions, and because he had no ties to Cyrus and Cambyses, he agreed with the plots of the Samaritan people. And when they wrote him about the possible threat the Jews played in, or could rebel against his power, Smerdis decided, or the pseudo-Smerdis decided, well, I'll play it safe and I'll just order the Jews to stop building their temple. And that's what he did. And so the work on the temple stopped by imperial edict. Despite the fact it was an illegal order, they stopped the work. And because of this opposition, the people became discouraged. And it seemed as though to them that they were trying to cross an insurmountable mountain. A mountain of opposition, persecution. They were not only dealing with the problems that were being created by the Samaritan people themselves, their opposition, but they also even had the civil government of Persia against them. This is what caused them then to stop building on the temple, and they turned to other pursuits, especially working on their own homes. And they began to build their own houses, and they even built them to the point that they were sealing them in, which meant that they were devoting a considerable time to detail relative to the security and comfort of their own homes. Meanwhile, the house of the Lord lay waste. It was still unbuilt. The foundation had not really fully been completed. And of course, it had no walls and was in a very sorry, shabby state. The eyes of the Lord, we're assured here, are in every place, beholding the evil and good, just as he would say and did say in the time of Isaiah. And God saw what had become of the work. He knew of the attitude of the people, of their discouragement, and he knew of their apathy. And so he sent the prophet Haggai to rebuke and encourage them in the 6th month of the 2nd year of the reign of Darius the Sosthene. Darius was the first cousin to Cyrus. And Darius all along suspected that this Smerdis was a phony. And he found out by way of one of the wives of Smerdis, actually a wife of Cambyses, found out that he was a phony, and Darius, with that information, stormed the palace and slew Smerdis, killed him, became king of Persia. Well, this Darius immediately, upon the appeal of the Jews to check the records, sought to restore the original edict of Cyrus. All of the, we read of the laws of the Medes and the Persians, how they alter it not. Well, that is generally true. But when you had an individual who was a fraud, like Smerdis, they did change. And so all of his edicts were declared null and void. All of his decisions were eradicated. And Darius ordered a search for the order of Cyrus, and they found it. And so he reinstituted that and gave the Jews the authority to rebuild. And they began. But Haggai, meanwhile, all of this is going on behind the scenes. Haggai is there to encourage the people. You need to get up and build. Even if the king's against it, you still need to carry out God's order. And one of the great lessons we see here in Acts chapter 5, verse 29, we ought to obey God rather than man. We could well see a time in our own nation when civil government tells us, hey, you people can no longer meet, worship. Well, we will then have to continue to worship, despite the order of civil law. Just as the early Christians did, that's how they wound up meeting in the catacombs of the Roman Colosseum, is because of such orders as that. There is a time when civil law, it is right to disobey civil law when it is in opposition to the law of God. 2 months after Haggai began to prophesy, the prophet Zechariah joined Haggai to exhort the people to get back to the work and strengthen the hands of Zerubbabel and Jeshua. And of course, noted, in the second year of Darius, they began to rebuild. The text itself is drawn from this background. Zechariah reports here a vision of one golden candlestick that represents the word of the Lord to Zerubbabel. That this is God's promise that He would aid the people in overcoming the obstacles that before them. That great mountain in the vision would become a plain. And so that mountain of opposition and persecution that the people saw that had discouraged them, God was going to take care of. And what we need to learn from this particular perspective is that despite whatever comes, and I know right now we're facing some uncertainties in our own nation, God's still in control. He's still on the throne. One of the great passages of the Bible that I've always found comforting is 2 Kings chapter 6. Isaiah 6, excuse me. In Isaiah chapter 6, you have a prophecy of Isaiah, where Isaiah is being commissioned to go forth and prophesy. And the prophecy begins with him seeing the throne room of God, and Jehovah in His temple, and seated upon His throne. And the vision is calculated to emphasize the glory, the power, the majesty of God, and that God's reign. But the key thought here is actually introduced in the very first verse, where it says that he saw this vision in the year that King Uzziah died. Now think about that. Uzziah had not been a perfect king. He'd not been a great king. He was not a king after the type of David fully, or like Hezekiah or Josiah. But Uzziah had been a pretty good king for the most part. We know him mostly as the leper king, because of when he had become strong, he was lifted up with pride. He tried to offer incense in the temple, and he became a leper, remained a leper till the day he died. That brought his son Jotham to the throne, and they were co-regents together till the death of Uzziah, and then Jotham continued on, then finally passed away and was replaced by the evil king Ahaz, his son Ahaz. But Uzziah's reign had been a prosperous reign. He had been victorious in battle. They had rest around about their enemies. They had been victorious not only in battle, but they also had a very stable economy. The people were prosperous, plenty of food in the land. They were at peace. And now this king who has brought such peace and prosperity is dead. Now the result's going to be what? Concern, confusion. What's going to happen? What are we facing next? This type of speculation would arise. I don't know where you may have been. Some of you would have been little things. I wasn't even around at that time when Franklin Roosevelt passed away. But I do read history. And I know that when Harry Truman was chosen to be the vice president to run with Roosevelt, that he was not well known by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, one of the reasons he was selected, according to some of the insiders of the Roosevelt administration, is that he was chosen because they did not believe he would upstage Roosevelt. That they believed he would remain in the background. As far as they were concerned, Roosevelt was going to be the president for the next 4 to 8, maybe the next 12 years. And they did not expect him to die in office that way. And especially with World War II still going on. And Truman, when he was notified that Roosevelt died, almost panicked himself, because he had so little background and so little training to deal with such issues. And yet he saw America through the last 2 years of the war. 1944, the remainder of 44, and all the way through to the September of 45. And finally, the great decisions that he had to make concerning the atomic bomb, the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those were horrendous decisions for an individual to have to make, knowing that hundreds of thousands of people were going to die in order to save millions. Awful decision to have to deal with, but he was willing to make it. At the time that Roosevelt passed away, there was great concern over in the United States about what's going to happen. What's going to become of it? Of course, actually Roosevelt died in 45, excuse me. But still, the great contest is going on. And the war is still in doubt in certain areas. In fact, the Nazis considered the death of Roosevelt a sign that things were about to turn around. This is the situation the world faced. Such concern and angst that went through the people. Well, the Jews faced that. They faced that in the time of Zechariah. How are we going to deal with these problems? The whole purpose of this vision is to emphasize God still rules. God still reigns. I remember hearing Brother Ira Rice one time talk about John O'Dowd. Brother O'Dowd during World War II, and somebody said, well, O'Dowd, what are you going to do if Hitler comes marching down Main Street? And Brother Rice said, Brother O'Dowd said, the God I serve is able to chase Hitler into hell with a bumblebee. And that's the case. That's true. If God desires it to happen, it's going to happen. If that is His aim and purpose. His providential care and guidance over everything is going to eventually rule out. And it may not occur just the way we would like it to occur, but His purposes, His ends and purposes can be fulfilled through us or in spite of us. But they will be fulfilled. The vision also had two olive branches, which poured the oil into the candlestick through two golden pipes upon the candlesticks. These represented Zerubbabel and Jeshua the high priest, and was designed to emphasize the fact that God was with them and they were His servants and His instruments, and He was working to accomplish His purposes through them. The message simply stated is this: God's people should never despise the seemingly small things or small beginnings that they can do and start in His service. Get started. Don't worry about what's going on back at Shushan. God will take care of that. Your business is to get back to rebuilding the temple. That's the message. And that's what they did. And then, as they are in the process of rebuilding, they get the word, Darius has now authorized the Persians. And not only has he authorized the rebuilding, but he's even sending gold and other things to help you to do the financing. Far beyond anything they could possibly imagine, God had turned the entire process around within just a matter of months. Small beginning, but how great the effect. Shortly after that, the foundation of the temple was laid, and finally the temple itself was rebuilt. It was not built at that time on the scale of the first temple of Solomon, but it was the temple of the Lord, and the Lord's presence graced it, and the Lord blessed them as a result of it. There are some great lessons, as we've already noted a couple, that we need to keep in mind in the time frame we have left. When do I need to quit? About 4:10? Okay. One thing we see is the importance for God's people to realize that great things come from small things. We have an old adage, great oaks from little acorns grow. We say good things come in small packages and things of this nature. These truisms represent certain truths that we acknowledge to be the case. You hand the ladies a little box about so big that's nice and wrapped up. What do they normally do? What do they assume? give them a little box. That's some nice gold rings in there, probably. Or a necklace, or a bracelet, or something like that. And you see their face light up when you bring it out. Men, if you want to fool them, give them a dish pack and stick it somewhere and hide it in there. And make them wonder what the world's in there. Of course, I know one fellow that did that, and his wife went through. She's throwing paper everywhere. In fact, great God knows who it was. It was Jim Gilmore. This Gilmore, she's going through there throwing paper into the fireplace, and she burnt the ring up. But you get one of those little packages. She is your best friend. And will be. Have you seen that thing passed around on the internet? You want to put a test, Ben, between who is your best friend, your dog or your wife? Stick them both in the trunk of your car, leave them for an hour, then open the trunk and see which one is glad to see you when you're around. I just had to say. That's a Doug McClure. I think Doug started that. Anyway, good things come in small packages. We recognize that principle. In secular matters, we see it demonstrated again and again. The great assets of the banks often started with the first dollar they received. Now they're wasting billions, but at one time they had to start with that first few dollars. Institutions of learning had to start from a small smattering of students. Libraries, such as that of Congress, began only with a handful of books. I remember a time when I could walk around here. I had a suitcase when I was going to school. I had just about all my books in it. I could do that. Can't do it anymore. The same principle is true of the Lord's church. The prophet Daniel, in prophesying of the kingdom, spoke of it as a stone which became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Daniel 2, verse 35. Jesus compared the kingdom to a grain of mustard seed which becomes a tree and fills the whole earth. Matthew 13, 31 and 32. He also described it as being like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal. And then it leavened the bread throughout. Matthew 13 and 33. Every large congregation had to have some beginning at some time from a handful or even just 1 or 2 families in order to get started. Every one of them did. Every one of them ultimately owes their origin to the efforts of but a few people getting things going. So despise not the day of small things. I remember when this congregation was closing in on 300. There may have been a time it was over 300. I don't know. But I know that this building on occasion was packed, especially during lectureships and gospel meetings. I remember during Brother Roy Wallace's meeting, I was sitting like on the second row behind Brother Bill Klein and all of these other gospel preachers sitting up front. And looking back, and I don't think I could see an empty spot anywhere. And 2 hours later, when Brother Wallace was still preaching, I don't think anyone had moved. And of course, when Brother Wallace was speaking, if you got up and moved, he let you know. But we had a huge audience each night during that gospel meeting. But brethren, God is as pleased with an audience of 10 that's faithfully serving Him as He is 10,000. And we need to understand that. And we need to begin where we are and build. Don't look to the past other than for pleasant memories and things of that nature for lessons to be learned. Which is, in effect, what we have done this morning. But look to the future and look to the present for what we can do in helping to build the Lord's cause here and now. And doing what good that we can do in the time that we have. You never know what souls 100 years from now will be here simply because of what you do this day and how you live your life in this time. You never know it. Not this side of eternity, at least. And that is the lesson I want to leave with you. It's the most important part of it. The principle of Christian living also involves this very thought. Growth is a natural part of Christianity. You do not come forth from the watery grave a full-grown, mature Christian. Nobody does that. Some progress at a faster rate than others, but progress must be made by all if we are ultimately to become mature Christians. We're not born full-grown, but we grow up into Christ in all things, Ephesians 4, verse 15. Spiritual maturity requires nourishment from God's Word. It requires the proper study and teaching, the milk, and then ultimately the meat of the Word. I know you get that here. And then also it requires time, the exercise of our members and our faculties, so that we come to learn to discern between good and evil properly. We become full grown, Hebrews 5, verse 12. And then also there is exercise, exercising ourselves rather unto godliness, 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 7. You having our senses exercised to discern both good and evil, Hebrews 5, verse 14. Through that, by the application of the Scriptures and dealing with the experiences of life, comes wisdom. That's really where wisdom comes about. We've got brethren running around saying they're getting direct, miraculous wisdom. That's not how it comes. Wisdom in the Scriptures has always come about by virtue of the practical application of God's Word. And we see that time and again. We also see the need to plan for the future in the Lord's Word, to dare to dream. I remember Brother Andy Conley standing in this very pulpit preached a sermon by that very title, Daring to Dream. We need to do that. Too often we think only of today, of the here and now, and the way that we approach the Lord's work. We're too self-satisfied. The status quo is all we're concerned about. This kind of thinking chains us to our problems and to obstacles. It causes us to look at mountains and say there's no way we can get over it, rather than going ahead with the work and letting God take care of the mountain. And that's what happens. It's short-sighted. It takes no notice of the big picture relative to the Lord's purpose for the church. It gives way to pessimism, to despair. It winds up causing us to keep house relative to our work and worship. Congregations that have this attitude eventually stagnate and die. Zechariah's purpose was to call the leadership and the congregation of Israel to observe what would come in their future if they would carry out God's command. Their mountain of opposition would be made low. And notice, folks, that what was going on behind the scenes in Persia and what eventually would take place was not brought to fruition until after the people had already begun to work. God was not going to bless them in their indolence. He blessed them because they were working, because they were serving. And the church should learn that lesson as well. We must plan the work, then work the plan. Most congregations are simply too haphazard. There's no planning. There's no long-range goals. Nothing for the congregation to aim for. No projects in motion to where you can involve the congregation in a positive fashion. No blueprints for the future. And such is tragic. When we build our homes, we have a blueprint, do we not? Whether we actually make one up or not, some folks can build a house without a blueprint. That is a written one, but they have one up here. They already have in mind what they want to do. My dad could build a cabinet. Very ornate cabinet work. And never once put pencil and paper to design. He just had it up here. And he could couldn't do that. You give me a scrap of wood and a bunch of nails, and you know what you're going to have? A mess. That's it. I couldn't do it. I couldn't conceive of it. Just never had that ability. He could look at lumber and determine, this is what I'm going to do. Fred Stankley has that ability. He can look at wood and say, hey, I've got an idea of what I can do with it. Some people are blessed with that ability. Sometimes you have to develop that ability. Planning as to how we're to carry out the blueprints, all part of it, gathering the materials, getting to work. The Bible is our blueprint. Hebrews chapter 8, verse 5. And so we need to do the same concerning the Lord's house, which is the church, 1 Timothy 3:15. We must have a mind to work. Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 6, that's how the house was completed. That's how the wall was completed, by the way. Nehemiah is dealing with the rebuilding of a wall around Jerusalem, which wall was essential to the success of the rebuilding of the city itself. And the people have a mind to work. In 1 Corinthians 15:58, Paul says, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. For as much as you know your labor is not in vain. It's not in vain. How did they know that? He says, in as much as ye know. You know it's not in vain. How do we know that? He had just dealt with that when he had discussed the resurrection of Jesus Christ as proof that we're going to be raised from the dead. Christianity rests upon the historic faith and fact that Jesus Christ is raised from the dead. The fact that he is raised from the dead means we can do whatever God tells us to. We can get it done. That's what Paul's saying. The assurance of the resurrection of Jesus Christ vouchsafes the fact that God will be with us, not only to the end, but will be with us into eternity. That's the fact of the matter. We sing that beautiful hymn concerning because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Brethren, how many of us really believe? Hebrews 8 verse 28 says, all things work together for good. It didn't say all things are good. All things work together for good. To them who love the Lord and who are called according to his purpose. I saw this demonstrated just this past week. We had a gentleman obey the gospel of Christ who had opposed it. In fact, he was one of these who said, you folks are just a bunch of Campbellites. That's what he did. His wife was a member of the church, had been for years. They were in a terrible accident, not of their fault. 3 young men, 2 of them drunk, at least 2 drunk. The driver was intoxicated. Crossed the center line and hit them head on. I almost killed all 5 people in the accident. Fortunately, the lady and her husband pulled through, and one of the young men, 2 of the young men died on the scene, unfortunately. The driver and I believe a young man in the front seat with him. The outpouring of love, concern, the many expressions of kindness, kind deeds that were done relative to this family, to the sister in Christ and to her husband who was in the hospital for many, many weeks. Almost died several times. Made an opportunity for us to study with him. Well, he was baptized into Christ this past weekend. And that same couple is in contact with the family of the young man who survived the accident. They're trying to help him through. And if the young man and his family has the right attitude toward truth, it's quite possible that out of this great tragedy, 3 precious souls, one strengthened in Christ and the other 2 brought to Christ, that might not otherwise have done so. You have that it. God bless you.